Words. Words have changed. It's no longer about truth, reason, or consensus. They're an endless series of proxy battles fought by extremists and machines. Words, and their consumption of life, have become a well-oiled machine. The word economy. Words have changed. ID tag posters use ID tag sites, use ID tagged news. Algorithms inside their systems enhance and proliferate their half-truths. Mimetic control, information control, emotion control, argument control. Everything is partitioned and given the illusion of control. Words have changed. The age of consensus has become the age of personal control. All in the name, the illusion of averting catastrophe. And he who controls his own battlefields blocks history. Words have changed. When the battlefields are under individual control, words can kill. Last stop, we discussed Friedrich Nietzsche's claim that things like truth, value, and meaning are inherently subjective, despite their guise of objectivity. But nobody's suggesting the world is totally in the mind, least of all Nietzsche. His focus is on language, on words, not reality in of itself. Facts do not exist, only interpretations. Did you notice how, by its own logic, this claim is necessarily a subjective interpretation? This openness to interpretation goes way beyond direct valuational opinions or statements.
Who am I really? No one quite knows who or what they are. The memories you have and the role you were assigned are burdens you had to carry. It doesn't matter if they were real or not. That's never the point.
Nietzsche wants to describe the world without taking any one side, in light of how one's side, when taken to extremes, so profoundly colors one's view. Nietzsche thought the latently powerful were terrifying and potentially tyrannical, yet he thought the latently weak were crafty, sneaky, and thereby much harder to see for all their hidden schemes.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer. Every night, I can feel my leg, and my arm, even my fingers. The body I've lost, the comrades I've lost, won't stop hurting.
Miller seems full of hate and bitterness over the destruction of Mother Base and MSF, at least at first. He appears to long for justice through numerous displays of self-righteous angst and resentful suffering. Yet Miller is a liar.
Big Boss can go to hell. I'll make the Phantom and his son stronger to send him there. For that, I'll keep playing my role.
His lust for vengeance is promiscuous. Miller has been deliberately primed by the Patriots. He thinks he's playing a role, but the role is playing him. Zero knows that Miller is the perfect actor to cast in his drama because the best actors take ruse for reality.
The only reason we're having this conversation is because you still have a role to play. Fantasy can make for a powerful ally. But remember this reality, Kazuhira Miller.
Just like Dead Cell, many years later, Miller's little plan for revenge is something the Patriots put in his head without his awareness.
You were told that the eradication of Dead Cell 6 months ago was an act of the Patriots. We provoked and encouraged your hatred. And you opted for vengeance, just as we planned.
Hence, a lust for revenge parasitizes Miller by turning his own mind, own unconditional view on reality against itself. Miller thereby unwittingly serves as his own jailer, his own enforcer, all in the name of moral absolutes.
Diamond dogs.
Through blind rage and impotence, Miller acts out their shadow play faithfully. He follows Cypher's will without even meaning to. Because demons are the easiest thing to control in the world. Since they cannot or will not control themselves, they are particularly useful for rulers who dwell in the dark.
You see this? Diamond dogs.
Kaz's pain is phantasmic, not only in the sense that he longs for something lost way back in yesterday, but like the song of that name from MGS2, Miller's longing is for a time that never actually existed. It's a pain for a past, for memories, which only ever existed as memories, pseudo-historical recreations, half-truths, and fantasies. Like the song's refrain, I will find the joyfulness I'm longing for way back in yesterday. Miller's delusions aren't about truth. It's joyfulness, it's power, it's control that Miller, like the narrator of the MGS2 closing track, want, not the truth. If anything, the truth is an obstacle. Miller wants to sustain the fiction of a righteous crusade, but only the fiction. These twisted memories and retcons to Kaz's past are all deployments in his war of value, the power struggle that Kaz so totally tries to conceal. Hence, he is suffering under a third, yet no less crucial operating sense of the term phantom pain. A pain with only the pretense, the shell of suffering. A fake, illusory, or ghost pain, concealing Miller's inner, almost masochistic need to hurt. The pain's a cloak. Concepts like justice, fairness, and goodness are all just weapons for him, in the absence of a more traditional arsenal.
I'm gonna make him give back our past. Take back everything that we've lost. And I won't rest until we do.
Pushing Mother Base.
To be sure, Miller's goal, regardless of his target, is revenge. Revenge is really what the phantom pain, both as a game and as an idea, is all about.
What about him?
To illustrate this point, look at this scene with Kaz and Huey.
Miller was in contact with Cypher 9 years ago. He was working with them. He's the traitor snake!
Kaz is torturing Huey out of what Nietzsche calls the vengeful cunning of impotence.
Why?
You're the odd one out.
Why me?
We all lost something.
What?
Except you.
Kaz thinks Huey has lost less than he has, and because he feels cheated out of life, owed something, this disparity between losses renders Huey, in some bizarre twist of logic, responsible. Such is the intoxicating power of vengeance as ideology. It blots out all nuance and transforms one's view on the world into a game of absolutes. Yet Nietzsche didn't see the strong as any better, just more transparent. The whole no free will or moral responsibility thing cuts both ways. But while the strong were once openly terrifying and even cruel or violent without mercy, Nietzsche claims that the monotheistic belief systems altered the consensus with lasting effect.
Listen, I may dwell in the dark, but I refuse to be judged by your standards. Traitor!
From these beliefs, Nietzsche argues, the weak rechristen themselves the good and the just, while they deemed the strong as not just bad, but sinful and evil, demonic even.
It all started with him. Zero.
Zero designs the Patriots to perpetuate his control, even after death. He, perhaps more than anyone, believes in unconditional truth, and his truth is one of governance without borders.
He'll erase the Cold War, all war, from people's minds, and with it the world's borders.
What is Ocelot really saying here?
And they've got a name for Anderson's AI project. It's called the Patriots. It's all about ensuring that the concepts driving society appears the same in the mind of each person in that society. About maintaining the identity of the individual, and yet having that individual willingly make up part of the whole. I guess it's fitting to call that patriotism.
If you listen closely, you'll realize that it's something extremely subtle, concealed by the ambiguity of words to convey multiple meanings. Ocelot is saying that the Patriot system is one designed to give each person in society a ruse of their own, a fantasy, a sustained and invisible digital fiction. A fiction suggesting the world as exactly and absolutely as we already see it. A shadow world of ideals, built of priestly morality and would-be absolutes. Unlike every other ruler in history, the Patriots thereby do not need bother with any single set of unified values to impose upon the entire population. Instead, they can depend on the unconditional moral abstractions of individuals, on humanity's psychological dependence on illusions and lies, which their system facilitates. The Patriots can count on individuals to produce a modern society predicated on doublethink, all by that unwitting society's own doing, through the Patriots' Trojan horse of digitalization. Hidden inside is a foxdie-like virus, encoded to kill not any one person or race, but a word, the word truth itself. Truth is the one fiction that cannot be allowed to survive the 21st century.
Under certain conditions, someone can be made to play a specific role. Act like someone else. Cats do love to play as snakes.
Ola Tunander writes in The Government of Shadows, quote, "The problem with liberalism in political science or legal theory is not its ambition to defend the public sphere, political freedoms, and human rights, but rather its claim that these freedoms and rights define the Western political system." End quote. What about cases when the state itself breaks the law, dual state theory asks, or when it redefines the law to legitimize its own criminal activity?
Peace-loving people with phantoms of lost liberty, my message is this: your tactics only aid terrorists.
What about the massive infrastructure of a so-called national security state, which, like the CIA, NSA, and covert ops special forces, is free to unilateral action to violate all manner of laws, both foreign and domestic, and is also free to collude with international businesses, cartels, and other bodies of organized crime to subvert, restructure, or guide the law itself, both in terms of how it's enforced and how it's broken. As globalization has linked together economies and legal practices, it has also empowered and enabled the dual state to brutally assault fledgling democracies, fund, arm, train, and spread terrorism, and routinely violate all manner of local, regional, national, and international laws. Not only does the security state violate the law at its leisure and with impunity, It is the very notion of laws as a rational, moral, and binding framework which empowers the dual state to set the parameters, the context, for its own criminal, immoral, and violently repressive tyranny.
Zero grew old, and by the end his Patriots were being run by a network without shape or form. It encompassed the people, the companies, even the laws that protect them. Politics and economics became nothing more than iterations of the same oppressively uniform system.
The liberal dream of a private sphere where citizens engage in a capitalism legally bound to protect diversity, equality, and personal freedoms is inherently apolitical because it takes the trustworthiness, fairness, and disinterestedness of the government and law as a given. When the dual state openly violates the law, liberalism can only respond one of two ways. Accept the security state's claim that it has the authority to break the law with our interest and according to protocol in mind, or the willful marginalization of a discovery like the Abu Ghraib fiasco as just a few rotten apples. What liberalism wants is for the government to get out of the people's way, without realizing that the people are the only body in the way of the dual state from pursuing its interests around the world, within the law and without. In Nietzschean terms, the law is not an absolute abstraction emerging from reason or truth. It is a framework of legal and illegal procedures of spoken and unspoken power, with its own interests and motives, to convince others of its own absolute authority. The Bush administration legitimized illegal and inhumane practices like indefinite detention, torture, surveillance, and assassinations. Once these crimes were elevated to the status of quasi-legality, the public, members, and spokesmen for the security state were able to insist upon their legal right to crime. Politics is not a game defined by its rules. It is a game around those rules which inherently involves breaking them.
The 1980s would see U.S. citizens routinely harassed by terrorists abroad. Only recently has the United States been targeted on its own soil. For the first time, Americans demand to know how the government plans to protect its citizens. They are asking what steps leaders have taken to deal with the onslaught of terrorism. Beginning in 1985, a secret group of American commandos carried out dozens of terrorist attacks worldwide. They penetrated military bases, kidnapped government personnel, and raided weapons storage sites. They successfully targeted warships and even nuclear submarines. In true terrorist fashion, they placed incendiary devices on fuel farms, bombs on radio towers, and took hundreds of hostages. Bombing, arson, robbery, hijacking, kidnapping, hostage-taking, and mayhem, all carried out by Americans belonging to a government-funded group called Red Cell. In the strangest twist of all, Red Cell was not only staffed by U.S. servicemen, its targets were American military bases and personnel. Government officials refused to give public accounts of Red Cell's activities. In reality, there's little need to, because in the biggest surprise of all, every adventure and misadventure of Red Cell was videotaped.
The spread of international trade, inclusion, and digitalization has necessitated what dual-state theorists call the parastate system, legal, financial, or military entities that perform functions of a state without being recognized or held accountable as such. In short, power is not an authority which neutrally emerges from the ostensible pure reason of the law. It is taken or given only through struggle, participation, and a public willing to hold its own government accountable. Thanks to the liberal fantasy of the digital space as a utopian tabula rasa, as a space we can be our ideal selves simply by disassociating into the virtual from realities we dislike, American society has cocooned itself inside this big digital shell. Individuals constantly drawn into antagonisms against each other over competing fictions, over the right to be free from pluralism or disagreement in an inherently pluralistic confrontational space, are thereby lured into believing in a war of all against all on an individual level. Does this blank slate nomadic perspective, not tacitly normalize a world and global social structure sans frontiers? Does it not all but preclude authentic politics by the simple fact that using the internet a priori biases one's view towards socio-political engagement through the internet as an individual rather than as a member of a single political body, a nation, the people, who must exist as an aware, mutually mobilized group if they are to protect the interests of any one member of that group of any manner of difference or disagreement? No unified struggle for human rights, no consensus over truth even, can reign. We have become prisoner in a world sold to us by corrupt policemen, feckless technocrats, fascist thugs, and an ever-growing army of fundamentalist useful idiots. The system empowers and facilitates in order to keep fear, confusion, stupidity, and the vengeful cunning of impotence all at maximum levels. I say this, of course, not as fact, but as interpretation. We are all the same in that none are objectively right and true. This includes people. This also includes governments. This also includes laws.
Ridiculous, isn't it?
And what we are seeing is not the war in Iraq. What we're seeing are slices of the war in Iraq. We're seeing that particularized perspective that reporter or that commentator or that television camera happens to be able to see at that moment. And it is not what's taking place. What you see is taking place, to be sure, but it is one slice, and it is the totality of that is what this war is about and being made up of.
200 extra cameras don't make an ounce of extra insight into something, and we're getting a classic example where so much coverage is actually confusing us rather than enlightening us.
I doubt that in a conflict of this type there's ever been the degree of free press coverage.
Slavoj Žižek in Welcome to the Desert of the Real writes, quote, "It is already a cliché that a new form of war is now emerging, a high-tech war, in which precision bombing and so on does the job without any direct intervention by ground forces. We should note the similarity between this new warfare at a distance and the decisions of managerial bodies which affect millions. In both cases, abstraction is inscribed into a very real situation. The specialists taking the decisions are unable to imagine the consequences since they measure the effects of these decisions in abstract terms. And today's terrorism is simply the counterpoint to this warfare. The true long-term threat is further acts of mass terror, acts that are less spectacular, but much more horrifying. What about bacteriological warfare, the prospect of DNA terrorism, of developing poisons which will affect only people who share a specific genome? Money fetishism will culminate with the passage to its electronic form, when the last traces of its materiality have disappeared. At this stage, it will assume the form of an indestructible spectral presence. The debt is inscribed somewhere in virtual digital space. Does not the same also hold for warfare? What awaits us is the specter of an immaterial war, where the attack is invisible. Viruses, poisons, which can be anywhere and nowhere. On the level of visible material reality, nothing happens, no big explosions, yet the known universe starts to collapse, life disintegrates. We are entering a new era of paranoiac warfare, in which the greatest test will be to identify the enemy and his weapons. In this new warfare, the agents assume their acts less and less publicly. Not only are terrorists themselves no longer eager to claim responsibility for their acts, anti-terrorist state measures themselves are clouded in a shroud of secrecy. All of this forming an ideal breeding ground for conspiracy theories and social paranoia. Just as we drink beer without alcohol, or coffee without caffeine, we are now getting war deprived of its substance. A virtual war fought behind computer screens. A war experienced by its participants as a video game. A war with no casualties, on our side at least. With the spread of the anthrax panic in October 2001, the West got the first taste of this new invisible warfare. A superpower bombing a desolate desert country and, at the same time, hostage to invisible bacteria? This, not the World Trade Center attacks, is the first image of 21st century warfare.
We've sealed all the exits to keep it from spreading. No one's getting out.
Welcome back, everybody. It certainly has been a tough day and days for all of us at NBC News because, of course, the press conference that announced yesterday that an NBC News staff member actually had been tested positive for anthrax.
The letters sent to NBC and the New York Post were the same. This is next. Take penicillin now. Death to America, death to Israel. Allah is great.
It's been reported that the office of Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle has received a letter containing a powdery substance.
Morning. I'm speaking to you today from Shanghai, China. America has now confirmed several different cases of anthrax exposure in Florida, New York, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. We do not yet know who sent anthrax to the United States Capitol or several different media organizations.
Well, we don't have any hard evidence, but there's no question that anybody who would mail anthrax with the attempt to harm American citizens is a terrorist. And there's no question that Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization, so it wouldn't put it past me that they're, it wouldn't surprise me that they're involved.
And now the New York Daily News is reporting in the immediate aftermath of the 2001 anthrax attacks, White House officials repeatedly pressed FBI Director Robert Mueller to prove it was a second wave assault by al-Qaeda.
Good morning. As all Americans know, recent weeks have brought a second wave of terrorist attacks upon our country. Deadly anthrax spores sent through the U.S. mail. 4 Americans have died as a result of these acts of terrorism.
ABC's Brian Ross. Brian.
Peter, from 3 well-placed but separate sources tonight, ABC News has been told that initial tests on the anthrax sent to Senator Daschle have found a telltale chemical additive whose name means a lot to weapons experts. It is called bentonite.
Where for days and days on Peter Jennings and other shows, they claim that they were told by many sources inside the government that tests had found the presence of something called bentonite, which is the hallmark, they said, of the Iraqi biological weapons program.
A substance which helps keep the tiny anthrax particles floating in the air by preventing them from sticking together. It's possible other countries may be using it too, but it is a trademark of Saddam Hussein's biological weapons program.
It turned out that claim was totally false. There never was any bentonite found.
Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade.
9 years ago, this man acted as accomplice to the attack on Mother Base. He then provided support to Skullface. Conspiring with Eli, he repaired Sahelanthropus in secret. His research materials caused the leak at the quarantine facility, which in turn caused the Walbachia mutation, letting the parasites off their chains. We lost a lot of good men.
Iraqi major who defected confirmed that Iraq has mobile biological research laboratories. We know what the fermenters look like. We know what the tanks, pumps, compressors, and other parts look like. Less than a teaspoon of dry anthrax, a little bit about this amount. This is just about the amount of a teaspoon. Less than a teaspoonful of dry anthrax in an envelope shut down the United States Senate. Just about this quantity that was inside of an envelope. Iraq declared 8,500 liters of anthrax, and Saddam Hussein has not verifiably accounted for even one.
The deadliest enemy's right here in our midst. And they will get no mercy.
It has been nearly a year since last fall's anthrax attacks, and U.S. authorities have yet to name an official suspect. Thus far, the only name that has been made public is that of Dr. Stephen Hatfill, a Maryland scientist who vigorously denied the allegations yesterday.
He was fired in 1999 for violating lab procedures, and then he got a job with the government contractor and lost that security clearance for that job August 23rd of 2001, just about a month before the anthrax went in the mail.
So,
the secret weapon has been a 3-member team of bloodhounds. Well, and there is no evidence against Hatfill or really against anybody. The anthrax letters...
the story you just told me suggests to me that certainly suspicion.
There's a great deal of suspicion about Hatfill.
We've reviewed into everything else that's happened since you arrived here. Please. Guilty! All counts. Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! Kill him!
Reuters.
Bruce Ivins was a former researcher at a government biodefense research laboratory in Fort Detrick, Maryland. His death, an apparent suicide, comes just as the U.S. Justice Department was said to be preparing to charge him with carrying out the 2001 anthrax attacks, a case he'd initially helped investigate. Newspaper reports say Ivins had been informed of his impending prosecution shortly before his death. Neighbors claimed he was being watched by the FBI.
We exist outside the law.
Americans did this to an Iraqi prisoner. According to the U.S. Army, the man was told to stand on a box with his head covered, with wires attached to his hands. He was told that if he fell off the box, he would be electrocuted.
I will now quote at length from the Spectacle of History, Speech, Text, and Memory at the Iran-Contra hearings by Michael E. Lynch and David Bogan. Considerable debate and confusion in the human sciences surround the issue of how and to what extent natural and cultural facts can be said to be socially constructed. This certainly applies to histories of the Iran-Contra affair. Some versions of that event may seem more transparently political than others, but we see no reason to suppose that any version, including our own, simply reports the facts of history. Instead, any criticism applies to a metaphysical conception of the factual origins of all genuine knowledge, and this conception has no direct bearing on mundane considerations about the real or illusory status of particular objects or events. To use a concrete analogy, a highway can be built well or poorly. It may remain solid for decades or fall apart soon after being laid. In either case, the highway holds together or falls apart as a construction.